Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 One Sustainability Conference, our annual global sustainability event. We now have the pleasure to welcome Jason Dodier, sustainability startup founder of the grain ecosystem and expert in sustainability around the world. And he's here with us today at One Sustainability. Jason will tell us about the roadmap to carbon neutral for your business. Jason, thank you very much and welcome to One Sustainability.
Well, Alex, it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be back with the One Business World community. And when I was approached about the opportunity to speak at this event, I jumped at it because, as you know, and many people have seen, there's no shortage of things we need to cover and talk about. And I'm hoping to be succinct today and cover some stuff that a lot of companies and individuals want to dive a little bit deeper in. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the grain ecosystem, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about what we do and what our ambitions are. But our competitive advantage at grain is that we're not competing within the carbon offset market. We're aiming to revolutionize it, right? And I can tell you, right, I've been very, very fortunate to attend North America Carbon World, Climate Week in New York City. Recently, I just got back from the Schneider Electric Innovation Summit in Las Vegas. And the pace and ability with which businesses can maneuver, right, to effectively innovate is going to be the main determinant of whether or not we can achieve our climate mandates. So when I hear a lot of these leaders speak and I get their perspective, it becomes very clear to me that we can no longer sugarcoat this thing, right? We have no time left and we've got to come up with solutions. Now, I've been on multiple platforms talking about what some of the things we might need to do to scale and grow. But I want to be really, really clear, and I've heard many people say this, we cannot let perfection be the enemy of the good when it comes to developing a carbon roadmap and decarbonizing. So I'll say it again, innovate, accelerate, and scale when it comes to the climate crisis. And look, winning slowly is the same as losing. Right? So to rebuild the world, we're going to need to accelerate and scale around bold climate solutions. And there's an ecosystem of a number of players that are going to need to be involved to help us there, right? Both on public and private sector. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act and what that means for companies around the world. But if you take even Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from the great state of Rhode Island, which happens to be more recently and talked about, we're all looking down the barrel of multiple and serious economic crash warnings. And the climate concerns have moved from communication shops to business operations and C-suite. And we have to align both political, state, federal and corporate ideals. So it's an urge and we've got to get back to work. Now, if you're a company and you're thinking about this today, some of the big things that should be coming to mind is, number one, how do you become the best operator in your industry and across the board against other companies? How do you derive impeccable ESG credentials and standards? And then how do you have local presence, right? Globalization, global, the whole mindset of bringing and accelerating how teams work in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And there's really three pillars that you should be looking to align with around driving change. And that's technology, money, and framework. And we have a big problem in this country of how those three things get translated, right? Because if we're gonna strive towards figuring out how to make renewable investments more profitable, you've heard things about CO2 taxes, carbon pricing, and permitting structures. But when you juxtapose that with what companies need to overperform and appease shareholders, you're going to see more and more corporations aligning together than ever before, almost in a command and control mechanism towards partnerships and technical and dynamic stakeholders. That's why you're seeing, companies, like Schneider Electric really accelerating what they're doing when it comes to innovation, corporate venture capital, and accelerating businesses like the grain ecosystem to go out and have the level of impact needed within these companies. So today I'm going to provide a few examples of how you can make a carbon roadmap with an emphasis on offsets as well for your business. And by doing so, I'm going to show some of the issues that lie within the carbon offset market. Many of you have seen the John Oliver skit that went out recently where he talks in detail about carbon offsets, but a recent Bloomberg study showed that over half of the current carbon offsets aren't really doing much to help the environment. And it may seem like big corporations are dumping money into projects that really have no fruitful value. And that's where places like Alberta, Canada, companies like Grain and Schneider Electric come into play to showcase best practices. Now, as of December 21st, in alignment with the Science Based Targets Initiative, this is a group of about 3,000 companies across North America and financial institutions that are currently working with and committed to achieving certain emissions reductions. They basically put forth saying we have targets of 53 million tons of CO2 equivalent and trying to reduce those emissions and equalize them. And that's the same as taking about 11 million cars off the road each year, to put that in perspective. So if you look at a place like Alberta, which is based in Western Canada, they've got the first compliance greenhouse gas trading system in North America. They've got an aim of building, deepening, and broadening compliance flexibility. One of the things that I really admire that Alberta is doing is they're identifying technologies worth investing in and currently have 175 megatons of reduction via carbon pricing framework with 300 offset projects that currently equate to 70 million metric tons of CO2. So again, putting that in perspective and thinking about where we need to go to from a society perspective. That also includes 18 protocols in place that are driving permanent behavior change in Alberta. So by 2023, there's going to be no more coal power, and they're going to have a fully functioning hydrogen-powered roadmap going forward. So there's not many places that can say that. I think we can all take a lesson from what they're doing. In addition, I had the privilege of speaking with some of the leaders from the Bank of Montreal. They have a very intensive and elaborate carbon trading strategy and decarbonization roadmap, and they're honing in on a number of key elements. So accounting, precision, prescriptiveness, integrity council engagement, and climate impact exchange work. So look for companies to start to accelerate, both companies and the societies, states and provinces they operate within, to start accelerating in this way. Another example I want to highlight is essentially when you look at the global stage, obviously Schneider Electric has been a leader there for a decade plus, and they recently launched something called the Net Zero Project. So the Net Zero Project essentially is partnering with 1,000 of their top upstream suppliers, essentially representing 70% of Schneider Electric's carbon emissions, and working to have those operations of CO2 emissions by 2025. Now, this initiative is part of Schneider Electric's 2021 to 2025 sustainability goals, and it's a concrete step towards limiting the rise in average global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less, by the end of this century. And this was targeted by the Paris Agreement. Now, under the program, Schneider is providing a number of tools and resources so these participants can take part and help them accelerate their movement and momentum towards carbon reduction targets. Now, suppliers will first be encouraged to quantify their CO2 emissions, just like any company should be looking to do today, leveraging a suite of digital tools. And then suppliers are then going to take this data to help them set the goals in a baseline around emissions reductions. Suppliers are also going to be working towards their goals through decarbonization initiatives, such as energy efficiency or renewables. In this project, the way we see it is going to be bringing peers and partners together to accelerate new innovative solutions around decarbonization. And look, since most corporate competitors have the same problems with sustainability and social reputation, it's really, really worth trying to solve the problem together, right? We cannot afford to operate on an island right now, regardless of who it is that you work for and who you compete against. And there's just one more thing to highlight, right? And I'm sure you've seen it across this platform over the last, yesterday, today, and the next couple of days. There's going to be a lot of discussion on the Inflation Reduction Act, what that means towards energy security and climate change resilience investments. I mean, these are critical right now. And under current policy, we expect greenhouse gas emission reductions to essentially reduce 24 to 35% from current levels under what the Inflation Reduction Act is putting in place today. So we've got advanced goals that have to be moved very, very quickly. And even more important is creating a new clean energy and sustainability accelerator that's going to seed state and local clean energy financing banks. This is not only going to help disadvantaged communities access the benefits of the law, but it's going to cut energy costs, right? So it's going to make it more affordable to purchase energy efficient electric appliances. You're going to be able to do home improvements. You're going to have different feasibility mechanisms put in place to drive down costs. And overall, the law is going to put America on track to meet some of these climate mandates going forward. So there's a lot happening, both from a state, local, corporate, federal leadership perspective, to try to drive and accelerate a carbon roadmap that businesses can put in place and stick to and accentuate and iterate over time. Now, knowing full well that many companies will never be able to achieve net zero just based on changes they can do in-house via scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 abatements. And I'll define those really quickly too. I mean, if you think about scope 2, that's distributed energy resources, microgrids, so leveraging energy storage, battery systems, solar, wind, geothermal, et cetera, to drive electrification. The way we see it right now, we expect energy and electrification to increase 4 times by 2040 in terawatt hours. We're going to see a 6 times growth in the number of IoT devices by 2030 and 140 times global IP traffic by 2040. So if you look at scope 2 emissions, right, that's a big part of how we're going to electrify, and obviously look to companies that can drive microgrids and drive renewable energy solutions. Now, scope 1 is direct greenhouse gas emissions that come from sources that are controlled by your company. Think about boilers, furnaces, and vehicles. And scope 3 are emissions, like I just talked about with the net zero project at Schneider Electric, upstream supply, right? So everything in your value chain that you essentially buy, use, and dispose of, so products from suppliers, that's scope 3 emissions. And this is precisely where carbon offsets come into play. Because if you think about the most basic examples of offsetting emissions, look no further than a typical consumer on a commercial flight. So when you think about offsets, the first things that may come to mind, and I was talking about this at a conference last week, is the carbon that your carbon footprint on a long haul flight. So let's say you're a consumer, you take a flight, and your carbon footprint that you're responsible for is roughly 28.4 tons of carbon. Putting that in perspective, that's roughly 90,000 miles traveled by a car. So a significant number of emissions released. Luckily, now this consumer has a chance to offset the amount of carbon release by paying a fee that enables them to invest in carbon removal projects. So that's a very simplistic example. However, the main flywheel and subsequent steps that exist to get a carbon removal project off the ground and create offsets is much more complex, with a multitude of what I like to call minefields and difficulties that the grain ecosystem is positioned to solve, aiming to drive equilibrium between suppliers and buyers, simultaneously scaling up carbon removal technologies. Now, our goal at Grain is to enable a virtuous and transparent cycle, which would first commence essentially with a project, right? And when you think about projects, they could either be nature-based sequestration, technology-based removal, direct air capture comes to mind, certainly to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. Avoided nature loss or reduction of methane from landfills is an example. Now, one area of immense interest for us is biochar. So biochar has been around for thousands of years to enable soil nutrient retention and improvement, and is thought to have originated in the Brazilian Amazon. So think about Brazil, by the way, they have a very big election coming up, and a lot when you think about emissions and protecting the Amazon is at stake in those elections. But essentially, so Brazil has been the ethos of a lot of technologies, and biochar is quite modular and offers quick production at small scale, with the average project producing 7,000 credits at $100 per metric ton. Now, to get biochar, you have to burn biomass. So these are crop residues, right, that are typically left on a field, nut shells, fruit pits, bagasse, etc. And when you look at that, you burn it in a low oxygen condition, and that creates biochar. It's a carbon-rich substance that some experts tout as the key to soil rejuvenation. And it's relatively lightweight and porous, so biochar can act like a sponge and serve as a habitat for many beneficial soil microorganisms that are known to promote soil and plant health, while in addition, sequestering carbon, this is the key, with a mean residence time of about 2,000 years. So if we want to hit these broad-based targets, this is the type of carbon removal technology we need to support and scale, and that's one of our core visions at Grain. Now, from these projects, you undergo a number of quality objectives and have stringent criteria that can be used to assess the quality of the credits. So the first thing that comes to mind is permanence. So ensuring you've got permanent carbon offsets that are reductions that cannot be reversed. So in other words, carbon removed can't be reintroduced into the atmosphere, right? And you want to make sure there's also some level of additionality. So a project or activity that reduces greenhouse gases would not have happened without either A, the offset buyer or collective buyers in the market. And also to qualify as a genuine carbon offset, the reductions achieved by the project need to be, again, additional, meaning the project would not have happened otherwise. And that's very, very important, right? Making sure it's not business as usual. And again, as I said at the beginning, it's all about validation and verification. We're going to discuss that a bit more in detail momentarily. But from this process, credits are then created and priced based on tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. All right. So we've covered two elements of the four big elements as part of the flywheel. Now, the next key piece, and many of you listening in to this talk are probably involved in this area in one way or another. There's three elements to it. It's the investment front. So these projects are typically funded by project finance, right? So large banks and institutions that are looking for returns on credit-worthy projects with offtake agreements, and they're looking to make these investments over the long term, right? The second piece is companies that procure the offset. So I mentioned earlier, many businesses just can't get down to a level from a scope 1 or scope 3 net zero piece of abatement. It's just not there. So they need emissions. So they're going to procure offsets like the ones we just talked about being created from high quality permanent carbon removal technologies and solutions, right? Now, the third area as part of finance, which is very, very important, is what we call catalytic capital, right? So this is patient, risk tolerant, concessionary, and flexible, and it's in ways that differ from conventional investment, right? So think of catalytic capital as a way to bridge capital gaps and achieve breadth and depth of impact while complementing conventional investing. And a really good example that I like to highlight and talk about here is the Frontier Fund. So the Frontier Fund is funded by companies like Stripe, Alphabet, Shopify, Meta, McKinsey, and tens of thousands of businesses that use Stripe Climate. And really what it is, it's an advanced market commitment to buy an initial $925 million of permanent carbon removal between now and 2030. So extremely essential to have catalytic patient capital coming into the marketplace to help drive and spin this wheel. And at Grain, we are happy and ready to work with these companies to provide access to high quality carbon offset projects that they can look to invest in and drive throughout the ecosystem. Now, there's great demand for offsets and people want to become more sustainable, right? So given that there's a lack of high quality permanent projects that are producing offsets, there's been a lot of talk from companies like Shell and even companies like KitKat that are putting sustainability messaging in their marketing, right? Their core businesses and their brands, claiming to be accelerating towards net zero. In a sense, helping to decrease emissions by 50% in 2030, and obviously net zero by 2050. And there's a lot of sustainability jargon out there. Yet without equilibrium between supply and demand, it's going to be a very arduous task, right? So if you think about what Grain is doing to drive equilibrium, we are focusing on the supply side challenge and partnering with Schneider Electric and others on the demand side. Now, this dual opportunity is going to enable Grain and companies, other companies that are out there to accelerate and provide project developers and companies like yours the solutions you need when you need them. You know, we want to do away with operating in the wild, wild west. There's just too many zombie projects out there and too many projects that die on the vine. And I can tell you from talking with almost 100 project developers all over the world, these kind of solutions where you can spread it all out are wildly needed, right? So if you think about the complexity and the pain of a current solution to get a removal project off the ground and certified, it's a lot, right? There's a lot of paperwork that goes into it. It's a heavy, heavy cost burden. It's typically spread out across a number of platforms. You know, our job is to ensure that these procedures are seamless, easy to execute. And for this reason, at Grain, we've developed a new way of viewing these processes, right? To ensure that the offsets we offer to buyers are efficient, effective, and readily accessible. And we aim to accelerate that through our perspective, you know, the work that we've been doing and our collaborations. And the end goal is really to be the turbo tax for carbon offsets. So again, if you think about what goes into getting these projects offline, from identifying an opportunity, doing a feasibility study, you know, PDD documents, is a project profitable? If so, then what methodology do you align with, right? What registry? Climate Action Reserve, Gold Standard, Vera, right? There's a lot of methodologies. There's new methodologies coming to market today on biochar. Then you register, you know, deploy, generate the offsets, as I mentioned earlier. So there's many, many pieces to it. And I can't tell you how proud we are and I am to be part of the solution. Now, in closing, and I've said this on a variety of platforms, but I want to really highlight, right? This is the largest industrial scale up of an industry in history. I really view this as our Apollo moment, right? There's huge upside in building out the global supply of high quality, permanent carbon removal. Not only are there massive opportunities for companies like yours to make small investments of capital, right? And massively impact development of new suites of technologies that can make a major impact on human suffering, food scarcity, and what the climate is going to look like in 2030 and 2050. And these topics, I'm telling you, are going to dominate COP27 in Egypt in a handful of months. We're standing at an inflection point in world history, ladies and gentlemen. Cleaner air for our children, more bountiful oceans, healthier forests, and ecosystems for our planet. We can create an environment that raises the standard of living around the world. And this is a moral imperative, but it's also an economic imperative, right? And there is no greater threat to our planet than the belief that someone else is going to take radical action and do it for us, right? We need to take radical action collectively. We need to dare to disrupt together. And I'm going to end my talk by saying this, and it's something that Schneider Electric North America President Amar Paul said last week at the Schneider Electric Innovation Summit in Las Vegas, where I was very fortunate and privileged to be a speaker on behalf of the grain ecosystem. And it goes like this: all disruptive change has three phases: crazy, dangerous, and obvious. And if we wait until things are obvious, it's too late. We're at that moment with climate change. So let's act together, leverage what we're building at the grain ecosystem, and let's go and meet these stringent, heavy objectives together, because it is possible and we are doing it. So I want to thank you all again, Stelios and the rest of the team at One Sustainability Conference and One Business World, for having me. And if we do have time, I would welcome answering questions. Otherwise, I'm available and happy to talk to anybody at any time about this topic. So again, thanks for having me.